Right, welcome to part 6 of Project BFE Max. In this episode we're going to be installing this beefcake of a Z1 coil onto the BFE frame. What we need to do is let me get it in the picture a bit better. What we need to do is measure this and get this cut down to the right length to suit the frame, the headset, spaces we want and the stem we're going to be using. So, first job is to install this crown brace onto the fork steerer. This used to be a bit of a pain in the butt job because you used to have to hammer these onto position, but now these more high-end ones have a nice little split in it, so you can just simply drop it on. I like to get things square, you don't need to, and that's it, you just slide it on like that and job's done. Just make sure it's nice and home. Next we need to drop the bearing onto the fork. Just make sure you get this the right way up so the taper's pointing upwards. At this stage we're not going to grease anything up because we're just literally loading all the parts of the assembly on so we can get an accurate measurement and mark where to cut this. So at this stage that's all we need to do.
So what we need to do now is build up the assembly on the bike. Start by inserting the fork and that lower headset bearing into place. We don't need to worry about greasing things up at this stage because we're just literally loading it on to make a measurement. It's the upper headset bearing, pop that on, make sure it sits in the cup properly. For this headset, next we have the tapered ring to drop on. You should follow your manufacturer's instructions, but for this tapered ring. Then on this headset we have a couple of shims. I've pre-worked this out. I need 2 on there to have the perfect adjustment from the weather seal, which is next. Next, add the spacers you want to fit. I'm going to have 3 10mm spacers for my bike, for starters anyhow. It might end up lower, but you can always cut twice if you want it lower. Then the stem you're going to use. For now I'm going to be using this 50mm Thompson stem. In the future I think I might want to go down to a 35, but to get the bike up and running that's what I'm going to be using. Now if I was to mark and cut the fork at this height here, like I'm pretending to do, I wouldn't have any room to add any preload, so what I need to do is I need to measure down from that point by 3 to 5mm. And the best way I found to do this is to swap out a 10mm spacer for a 5mm spacer and mark at that height. So I'm going to remove the stem, remove one of the 10mm spacers, pop the stem back on, then add a 5mm spacer. Then I'm going to nip the stem up because all this time I'm having to hold the fork every time I undo it. So there you can see the height difference between a 5 and a 10. So I'm just trying to demonstrate this here with a bad angle, but yeah, let's try from another angle. So with a 5mm spacer we can accurately mark our preload adjustment gap. There's no preload on this at the moment, so the gap will reduce down from 5mm to probably about 3mm I reckon. That's the way I like to do it anyhow. At this stage, before you mark and cut anything, it's a good idea to make sure your fork hasn't dropped or it's wobbly in there. As you can see, mine was dropped through a little bit when I was assembling this lot up. So yeah, it's a good idea just to double check these things before you start chopping things open. So yeah, just pushed the stem down against the fork there to try to compress everything. So I'm going to be marking where to cut with a scribe, just so it's like an indelible mark. Obviously a black steerer tube's not that good for visibility. If it was silver you could use a pen, but you could use a sharp knife or something. I'm basically just putting a scratch around where I want to cut it so I have an accurate mark, it doesn't disappear. It's also a good idea to mark the whole way around, just so you got a view of where you want to cut from every single angle. Next I'm going to disassemble everything and place it in order that I took it off, so I knew I could get the right order putting it back together, because if you don't you'll forget and it'll go wrong. Next I pop the frame out the stand and then pop the fork in, because Why make life hard? The stand can hold the fork for you and make the chop inside much easier. Just be sure to give yourself plenty of space to work. I'm going to be cutting the fork steerer with a pipe cutter today. I'd only recommend using these on aluminium steerers. For carbon and steel, use a hacksaw. You won't get through it with one of these very easily. Definitely not on carbon, but it cuts perfectly perpendicular every time. Just make sure you're using a slightly larger one. The super cheap ones for £5 or £10 aren't very good, but once you pay £15 to £20, they're a lot better, I think. And a lot of them say they're cut for copper piping or aluminium piping, so get one of the slightly sturdier ones and you'll be doing fine. How they work is there has a little very sharp steel wheel in there and two rollers at the other side, and you just apply pressure and it cuts a groove, and you apply more pressure and it cuts a groove, and it works its way through. The only thing you have to ensure is that you line up with your cut mark. So that's what I was doing initially, getting my eye in with it. Then each turn I do a turn, add a little bit of a pressure onto the cut wheel, another circle, bit more pressure, another circle round. It by this stage is guiding itself, you don't have to worry about it too much. A little bit more pressure, it's going round, more pressure, and it's pretty much gone. Bit more pressure maybe, and it's so fast, why faff around with a hacksaw? After it's cut, as you can see, there's a bit of a sharp burr on the inside that we need to remove. There's a couple of ways we can do this, with files or deburring tools. Personally, I got both. I prefer a file. Yeah, just get in there and don't poke it because you'll cut yourself. To get in there to remove this burr, you're going to need a round file or half round file, and just take your time, get in there, add a little chamfer to the inside and add a little chamfer to the outside so it all assembles really nicely and you'll be good. Next, we need to install a staff angle nut. You should get the proper tool to do this and do it the right way. I don't have that tool, and I only install a fork once in a blue moon, every third year maybe. So I've developed a way of bodging it with a bolt and being pedantic with a hammering. Yeah, it's not elegant or pretty, and I don't advise doing it this way, but it can be done. There's a lot of effort trying to get it to go down centrally. Yeah, buy the tool or go to a bike shop. Don't do it this way unless you're me and too cheap to go to the bike shop or buy the tool. With the staff angle nut installed, give the fork a wipe down to make sure it's free from any filings and dust like that. And then reinstall the crown race onto the fork, and we can get ready to reassemble everything. So we're pretty much ready to reassemble everything right now, but before we do that, we need to apply some grease to the headset cups and to the bearings, just to form a protective layer and to ward off any water trying to get into the headset system. It's always a good idea to put some gloves on for this, to stop any skin issues you might get from reactions with the grease. If you're constantly washing your hands, you can get dermatitis. So get a glove on for the one you're going to be smearing the grease around with. Apply liberal amounts of lube to the upper and lower cups. I like to go around and give it a good grease up. Spread it around nicely. Then add a little bit of grease to the fork crown. It's there as a sacrificial layer really. It just takes up any small spaces that might get filled up with dirt and water. And if it's full of grease, it repels the water and keeps out the dirt out the little tiny gaps. Once that's greased up like a good one, place the bearing onto the fork, slip the fork into the frame, then grab the upper bearing and place that over the fork and into the upper cup. With that in place, I'm going to grab the grease for the final time, just smear a little bit over the top of the bearing. Again, we're creating that sacrificial layer. It's not helping anything steer. The bearings are doing the bearing work of steering the forks. This is just there to stop any water and grease getting in and causing rust in the future. Next we place on a tapered spacer. This locks everything tight in position. If you've ever ridden a bike without one of these, you can realise how bad it is. Next, for this headset there's two tiny shims I have to drop on there to space everything out perfectly. Then we have the top cap. That's basically the whole headset assembled now. That headset has two O-rings on it to again keep water and grease out. Next I'm adding on my spacers for me, and I just drop one. It'll be three 10mm spacers. And next I'm going to go for the stem. For my initial setup I'm running all the spacers under the stem. I'm a bit fussy about my handlebar heights, so I probably will end up much lower than this, but at this stage of the build I'd rather have too much steerer than too little, and I can always chop it down in the future. You know, I can try no spacers to 30mm spacers here. I'm just grabbing an Allen key to nip up the stem. This is only interim stem for this bike. I think I'll end up with a 35mm stem in the end, but I have this, you know, in my spare parts, and then I get the bike up and running because the stem I'd like, I can't find it in stock right now. And it's not exactly a crap stem. It's Thompson. It's made in USA. High-end bit of kit really. It's not super expensive, but it's just a little bit old. I think I bought this in 2012, so 9 years old, but it still looks great. You know, Thompson, one of the best bike part manufacturers out there. So after that's all assembled, I give it a quick wipe down just to rub away any extra grease. Take the gloves off because I hate wearing those gloves. And we can move on to the next stage. So the next thing we need to do is add a top cap to the assembly. I'm going to be using this nuke-proof top cap. This is one, it's a bit of a weird one. It's designed for a cycle computer so you can fit it into it. So it's got a bit of a weird drilled out shape and there's multiple bolts. Here's a question for the viewers. Would you have the nuke-proof facing forwards and backwards or left and right? Forwards or back and left and right? I think I'm going to go forwards and back just because it doesn't clash with the Thompson sort of logo on the stem there. Gives a bit of separation between the two brands. So yeah, I'm just going to take up the slack within the system using the Allen key here. Doesn't have to be super tight, just trying to pull the fork up into the stem effectively. So there's no advice on this stem or this top cap what torque I should have it set to, but many of my other bikes say 4 Nm, so let's go for 4 Nm. It sounds reasonable and it's nowhere near the yielded up bolt. So just winch that up with a torque setting up to 4 Nm. So the eagle-eyed among you would have noticed the torque setting on the Thompson stem there. I need to change it a bit and increase the torque rating on the torque wrench. So I do these up to 5 Nm now. It'll depend on your stem. Each stem will vary. So I like to winch each bolt up a little bit by little bit just to take up the slack and feel some resistance, and then go for the clicks. And finally, I need to assemble the plastic insert into the headset cap. This can be orientated in 2 directions, one's for a Garmin, one's for Wahoo, then 90 degrees out of phase from each other. I've got a Wahoo myself, and I can't remember which way it goes around. I'll figure it out later. This is a bit of a weird stem cap. It doesn't grab the Wahoo that good, I don't think, not compared to the standard mount, but it works fine. I like the way it looks. It's very neat when you don't have your head unit on there. But yeah, just pop those in. I'm going to nip these up by hand. There's no torque rating for them, so it's probably like 1.5 to 2.5 Nm, so just finger tight basically. And there we have it. The fork and stem is installed on the BFE Max and ready for the next phase of the project, which will be installing an interim chain set. So thanks for watching this far. It's probably quite a boring video, but you know, I'm just trying to document it, the build as best as possible. Again, if you've watched this stuff, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again in part 7 of Project BFE Max. Cheers.